Hello, viewers, and welcome to the Team VVV podcast. So it's our first podcast since E3. And of course, joining me tonight is Kevin.
Hey, guys.
And a special guest tonight, the game director at Codemasters, or one of the game directors there, it's Paul Rustchynsky. Hello, Paul.
Hi, good evening, guys.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Paul. And of course, it's a special time of year, E3. We look forward to it. But having said that, there was a lot more revealed before E3 this year than I think normally we were used to in the past. There used to be a lot more sort of reveals. And I think going into the conferences this year, I think we kind of knew just about everything that was being shown. There wasn't really any major surprises. But what we're going to do in this podcast is we're going to talk a bit about E3, a bit about the conferences, and a bit about some of the racing games besides our other highlights of the show. So I guess conference-wise then, we started off with Electronic Arts. They hired an area in central LA. I popped along there and you had all the sort of lucky sort of YouTubers and media in the hall, and then you had members of the public outside who were queuing for I don't know how many hours in the baking sunshine to get into a rather crowded gaming area. EA, of course, was showing off Star Wars Battlefront. Need for Speed, of course, is back after a couple of years, amongst other bits and pieces with Battlefield and stuff like that. So I suppose kicking off then, Need for Speed. What do we all think of Need for Speed, Kevin?
So yeah, we don't know much about Need for Speed Payback. We've seen the sort of highway heist mission, which, as I understand it, is like a climax to the sort of the many chapters that the game has. So we can't really judge the game based on this sort of very heavily scripted mission. So we can't really talk too much about the game because we simply haven't seen enough. And what we have seen is, like I say, very heavily scripted. So who knows what the actual core of the game is going to be like.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Kevin, because, the game designer did come up to me. He says to me, we've reworked the handling. Alan, what do you think of the handling in the game? And I said, well, there's only 2 corners where you barely need to brake in the demo. And the problem with the demo was, which lasted a couple of minutes, and we've got it on the channel, was you drive to a location, and then you drive from that location to a truck, and you knock a couple of cars off, Burnout style. There was a lot of cut scenes. There was a lot of cutting away from the action. I just wanted to drive for 5 minutes and just get a feeling for the car. So the demo didn't really give me that. And I spoke to some of the developers, and I said, well, there's quite a bit of sort of interruption in the gameplay there. I just wanted to drive more. I suppose I wanted it to feel a bit more like Chase HQ, where you properly had to bash the car in front to slow it down. I really wanted to bash something a lot. Whereas at the moment, the takedowns are so much like Burnout, where you just sort of look at them and you rub against them, and next minute you're getting a replay there. There's no real hard smashing and bashing in that sense. It wasn't as satisfying as I'd like it to have been. Need for Speed is coming from, I would say, a difficult patch.
Yeah.
I wasn't keen on Most Wanted 2012. I've made that plain. I think 2015 was lacking in a lot of areas. Visually very nice, but gameplay and content was lacking. And I think this game really needs to bring it all together. And I feel they're still trying to find the soul of Need for Speed, the soul of the car culture, and what it means to be part of that car culture. But yeah, I mean, at the moment they're keeping it sort of close to their chest. I mean, Paul, you see reveals like this. I mean, you know how limited it is in terms of the PR and the marketing and everything. They can't show much. But what was your first impressions of it?
I'm very intrigued actually about it. I think it's fantastic for the dev team that they've actually had 2 more years rather than the typical annual cycle to work on the game. Working on an established engine and framework from the last Need for Speed. I'm expecting impressive things. And the problem with any sort of E3 demo, Gamescom demo, wherever you show it, you're always kind of having to show off the most spectacular or staged part of the demo, and it's difficult to give a full impression of the wider game. So I'm pretty sure when they come to show it next, whether that's Gamescom or wherever, we'll see a lot more from it. And I'm hoping to see, as you say, more of the actual driving, a bit more of the open world structure. And it kind of looks like to me they're going to have a bit of both, as in you're going to have all the story, the scripted events, etc., and all the exploration and driving. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they show next.
Yeah, well, visually, obviously, very nice. You raised a good point there about use of assets and building in one direction. Traditionally, Need for Speed was always built by different studios, and they had to keep building assets from the ground up. So when they moved to DICE, they're allowed to keep using those assets and building on it. This means more cars, more customization, you know, optimization of the engine and everything else. So it's really interesting to hear it from your point of view, and it did remind me of a conversation I had in the past with developers. So from Electronic Arts, obviously for me as a highlight, I will say I'm always keen on Star Wars Battlefront. I know it's not racing, but anyone should know that listens to this podcast regularly that I love a bit of Star Wars Battlefront. What did I think of Star Wars Battlefront 2? Well, I was just going to say that you know, we talked a bit about the trailer before, but what I saw the gameplay is, I know I'm not as keen on the prequels as I am on the original films. That's just my feeling. I kind of wish it was still around the originals a lot. I know there's original stuff in there. My only concern, I'll say to viewers who do play Star Wars Battlefront, is that characters like the super characters like Darth Maul, the hero characters, seem to be excessively powerful. And when you go onto a server full of noobs, nobody ever works together on Battlefield. I think that's an important thing to point out. When you go onto a server of Battlefield, it's every man for himself. And when you get an enemy character, skillful player, playing as, say, someone like Darth Maul, they're going to run around and kill everybody for ages, and they're going to swing the whole game. You know, one player like that can swing the game. I'm just a little bit concerned about that at this stage. But other than that, I can't wait to see a bit of Star Wars Battlefront. So that was certainly one of the most exciting things for me from EA. And of course, they mentioned the Battlefield edition as well, new maps for that. It just shows how it still looks so stunning, the technology that they use. So Electronic Arts, I will just say the event itself outside was absolutely crazy. You know, it's one of those days, a bit like Gamescom on a public day, where you say, would I queue for 6 hours to have one go on that game? I just couldn't do that. And in the heat, my goodness, it really is you have to be a dedicated fan to want to go through it. But either way, we've got footage on the channel of that. So EA was, you know, EA, it's never the most exciting one. They always bring out the sort of sports brands and all that other sort of stuff, but we won't go into all that here. On to Microsoft. I was at the Microsoft conference, and I'm just going to say that firstly, it was exciting. I like the stage. I like the look. I like the lighting. Amazing lighting and everything there. But wow, the bass. It was like a wall of bass in that place. Every time music played, you got hit by a physical wall of bass. It was like a punch in the chest every time someone, say, fired a shotgun in Metro or something like that. So the big news of Microsoft was the Xbox One X. What do we think of that name first, Kevin? What do we think of that name first?
Well, I don't like it personally. I would like to have seen them call it Scorpio, because that name sort of stuck, didn't it? We knew that name for quite a while now, and it's like what people are saying. X sounds far too much like S. So when people go into the shops, they ask for an Xbox One X. They say, was that an X or was it an S? You know, it's a bit confusing in terms of branding. So it's a strange decision. But then, you know, we've seen very strange decisions from Microsoft. You know, the Xbox One, you know, isn't that the original Xbox? You know, they just seem to be continuing the sort of trend of confusing name tags. So I don't know. I don't know whether the logic is there, but I personally, I don't really like the name at all. No.
Yeah, Paul, what do you think?
It's always a challenge naming anything, whether that's a piece of hardware or a new game. But when we're talking about these kind of iterative hardware cycles, as we've seen with PlayStation 4 Pro, now with Xbox One X, I mean, it's going to become increasingly hard to name these consoles as well. So yeah, it's difficult to see where things are going to go, and I'm not quite sure what else they could have called it, but you know, it's one of those things. I think we'll just get used to it over time.
We'll get used to it. I mean, I have to admit, I did like the name Scorpio. I remember last year mentioning to my mum about it and said, oh, yeah, Microsoft mentioned this console called Scorpio. And she says, oh, right, that'll be released around November next year then. I said, why? Because that's when Scorpio is. And it turns out it is. It was down to star signs.
See,
but there you
go. Always right, you see.
Always right. Just the most random thought pattern. I thought that would never come from anyone else. That. We had Forza Motorsport there with the new Porsche GT2, wasn't it? I forget the whole RS, but I don't remember the full name. And that was revealed on stage as well, which, I mean, people don't realize how big that news is, that car companies are actually using games companies to reveal a new car like that. And I think it's testament to the faith that car companies are now getting in games companies, you know, in terms of the relationship to reveal a car and demonstrate it in the game to that standard.
When we were working on Driveclub, that's one thing we've really noticed when working with car manufacturers. They were really at that stage where they were starting to understand the potential an impact of gaming on you know, on cars in the real world, and you know, they were willing to work a lot closer with you know, games developers like ourselves, and obviously the likes of Forza Motorsport, and you can see that now starting to come to fruition. And I think we'll only see tighter partnerships between car manufacturers and game developers in the future as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about damage, Paul? I mean, is that something, ever a conversation that still comes up in terms of limiting the type of damage?
Not really. No, it's that's becoming less of an issue as car manufacturers understand games more. They don't see it as much of a problem. Yes, I think in previous generations that was a problem, but I think now it's actually just more of a technical issue. Damaging cars is still a really hard thing to do.
Yes.
But I mean, it's terms of cost and modeling, I should imagine, you know, they're so sort of detailed now in terms of the amount of polygons, investment and textures and artists compared to, say, making a car 15 years ago, or, you know, whatever. It's much simpler to make. So, you know, like you say, I mean, it is interesting to see that. And I mentioned to Dan Greenwald, you know, when I think they had Rolls-Royce in Forza Motorsport 6 or 5, might have been a couple of years ago. And I said, you know, it was a big deal because that's the first time they'd ever appeared in a game. I think it shows how the, you know, the dare I say, the old man's club at the top of the motor racing world were starting to grow an interest, an intrigue, if you like, into the development of this area. So Forza Motorsport 7 then revealing the new car. And of course, you know, we see it running on the Xbox One X. My first impressions were I wasn't as blown away as I expected to be. And that was my first impressions of Forza Motorsport. I think it looks great. Forza Motorsport is always an incredible technical achievement, but I don't know why. Some of it just didn't quite blow me away as much as I was expecting to. What do you guys think? Paul, what did you think of Forza 7?
Well, I'm a fan of Forza. I've played it since the original. And I think where they're up to now is a fantastic achievement just in terms of the limited content, cars, and features they have in their games. I've always been very impressed with that side of things. I'm not going to comment on the visual side of things just yet. Yeah, I think it's too early. Again, even though they are first-party developers, and you know they've got many months to go before it releases, and I think we'll start to see, you know, lots of improvements as you know, as you've seen in the past when you show kind of pre-beta, pre-alpha, a lot of that final polish and things towards the end. And I'm sure it'll be a fantastic looking game. And it's one of those things I haven't yet seen in native 4K at 60 frames. I've been YouTube videos on my phone, so you know I want to really see the full thing on my home console before I can really judge it.
Kevin, what did you make of it?
What, visually?
Visually, yeah. Well, visually, just the whole presentation there. What did you make? Oh, I haven't seen the trailer, I might add.
Okay. Well, I think overall, I think Forza Motorsport 7 is the game that's really is going to be making an impact on this generation of consoles. This is the game that perhaps number 5 should have been. You know, you've got incredible amounts of content here. I think we've got like 700 cars. I think it's like 30 locations, something stupid like 200 different layouts. So in terms of content, it's a powerhouse. You know, whereas say Forza Motorsport 5 was, you know, lacking in that area. Of course, we're going to have 1080p on the Xbox One, 4K on the Xbox One X, running at 60 frames per second. So it's all the elements are there. They've got the dynamic weather and time of day, of course, which they kept. They didn't make a big deal out of that, actually, did they, in the presentation? So I guess they're trying to just sort of not make a big deal out of it because they want to sort of join their competition, if you like. So it's all the stuff is there, all the elements are there, all the content is there. So it's just how it all comes together. I understand they're going to overhaul the career mode as well. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with all the various sort of licenses they have. So looking forward to it. This is the only Forza Motorsport game that I'm really excited about on the current generation consoles.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just point out, actually, I did see some of the trailer, but I was filming some of it at the time because I was filming the stage thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously, graphically, it's always Forza Motorsport always looks amazing. I think there's something about just this desert track that I was expecting a bit more explosive for the first new circuit, perhaps shiny neon lights or something different, you know.
Detail, isn't it? It was lacking detail, I guess.
Yeah, it was my expectation of what this new explosive 4K Forza was going to be. I think we've seen some cuts between in the rain with the with Forza 6, and I think you can see it's an evolution rather than a revolution in graphics terms. So I'm going to talk a bit about, obviously we've got some other gameplay videos coming up. I'm going to talk a bit more about the handling in more depth there and what I thought of that. I did see it behind closed doors, and I saw a bit more of the game and the career, which is comprehensive. I mean, Forza Motorsport has always been incredible online. I mean, it's always had so many features, and obviously you can paint your own decals and everything else for the cars. I mean, they have a huge community there. So that'll be a big pull, but that was one of the main titles. The next title that I think was notable at the conference was the new Metro game running, which looked absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, it really was next-gen stuff. And I was watching it thinking, that cannot be the graphics sort of thing. You know, it really was stunning. I haven't played the previous Metro games. It's something that sort of passed me by. I keep meaning to. Paul, did you see the Metro? What did you think of it?
I did, yeah, no, extremely impressive. And I've only played one of the Metro games, but I really enjoyed my time with that. And it's good to see them coming above ground a bit more and coming out in the dark. And yeah, the size of the setting alone looks super impressive. Yeah, that's definitely one of my watch list.
They've gone with open world, have they not, this time?
It looks like it.
Yeah. I must say, I've got Metro sitting on the shelf somewhere, picking up dust, like many of my games. But I definitely will play those, and I definitely will play this new one because these, you know, stunning games. And it's just a shame that I have so many games sitting on the shelf that's not getting played. There's just too much out there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's so much to do. You know what I always say, when you're working in games and you're reviewing games,
you play less.
You play less. I play less driving games now than I have done, because for every 1 hour of play, I do about 5 hours of editing. So, you know, you're just video editing all the time on YouTube, and it really slows you down. So Metro looked incredible. There are various other titles. I mean, we saw 42 new titles. Backward compatibility with the original Xbox is coming, which, you know, got a few cheers, but we don't know what that means or what games will be coming for it, and we won't know for a long time yet. And of course, then for me, the next big one, really, because there's 3 big ones, and do point out if there are any massive games that you think I haven't mentioned here, really, was Anthem from EA. Again, it's one of those games that is barely believable, and you just see, well, I mean, Paul, as a developer, you understand the resource and the budget that must go into something like that. What did you think of Anthem?
Yeah, on a technical level, it was absolutely stunning. I mean, EA have got the fantastic Frostbite engine, which they're using across so many of their games. And it really shows that they've got a dedicated team working on an engine, supporting all their teams and really pushing it. Obviously, combined with the fantastic art direction, I think this could, you know, potentially be one of the best looking games released to date. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing something not quite scripted, as we saw in the demo, but obviously, as I said before, that's what you get at E3 and these sort of events. So I'm really kind of looking forward when we can start to see some proper, you know, co-op gameplay, unscripted, and just allowing us to see what it looks like naturally.
Yeah, it's funny when you say scripted. I've got to say the Forza demo was quite scripted, actually. You had these 2 female racing drivers on stage, and now I'm going to play Forza Motorsport in my 4K HD. It's like, oh, come on, we don't speak like that. Just play the game. It is quite funny how scripted some of these presentations are. But yeah, of all the different games, there was a range there. You know, Minecraft 4K if you wanted to play that. Another game that looked like quite fun was the Pirates game. I forget what it's called now.
Sea of Thieves.
Yeah, I think that looks like good fun myself. It's something I would probably like to tinker about with. But in terms of the Xbox One X, I was left underwhelmed. I actually felt that they undersold it. I was like, here you have this amazingly powerful system that also plays 4K Blu-ray, I might add. And, you know, I thought they were going to have about 5 new IPs for it. I thought they were going to have new IPs for the Xbox One, obviously, and Xbox One X. But I thought they were going to have new IPs and really push the boat out, because they have an opportunity to develop this new market. And they didn't deliver in that way. And I think that was something which I found surprising, that they're relying almost entirely on third-party support and a conversion of a game that was coming out, which is Forza Motorsport anyway. So maybe next year we'll see more from Microsoft. So, you know, an enjoyable conference to be at. It was a good show. Beaten up by bass for 2 hours. Left that, needed to recover afterwards. And that was Microsoft. On to Sony. What did I think of Sony? I would say Sony this year seemed a bit dull. It was like just watching a cinema, being in a cinema. They didn't even have the orchestra, I don't think, did they, that they had last year?
Right.
And it was just a very quick show of games that we'd pretty much seen before. Paul, what did you think of the Sony conference?
Well, as you kind of say, it was a very much shorter presentation than normal. Yeah, with not much in terms of like presentations. It was just all about the games and showing a bit more of what we've seen before. But having said that, games like Spider-Man, was it Days Gone? The zombie game.
Bit of Days Gone. Yeah.
Seen a lot more of these things in detail. It was nice to see a lot more of that. Sure, it would have been, it's always great to have more announcements, but I still think it was a solid lineup, and it's difficult to really be disappointed in what was shown because all the games looked impressive on a certain level.
You're quite right. I mean, they are all. Days Gone looks amazing. I mean, what they showed last year looked amazing, and now they're just sort of expanding upon that. You've got God of War coming as well, and you've got the other one remastered. Shadow of the Colossus, that's it, remastered, which was a nice surprise for everybody as well, I think. Yeah,
that was actually one of the highlights for me because I'm a huge fan of that game, and to see it remastered in such a way where they're actually pretty much doing it from scratch, I think that's going to look phenomenal.
Should do. It's one of those games that was always more ambitious than the hardware was able to deliver in a way. They were pushing it so hard, and they did an incredible job, I think, from an artistic perspective on that Ico as well. Ico, however you pronounce it. So a Sony conference for me was interesting. Was there anything that stood out for you, Kevin?
Nothing major. I mean, the last 2 years we've had these epic Sony E3 conferences. They've been incredible. I mean, as good as I've seen myself, and it was just a shame they couldn't make it a hat trick, really, because there wasn't any sort of real sort of drop the mic moments I felt throughout. And like Paul said, it was nice to see more of what we knew was coming, but it wasn't anything really that was sort of jaw dropping. No, there wasn't anything sort of that in that sense. It was sort of brand new, I guess. But Spider-Man anyway was a major title for them, and it looks impressive. Superhero sort of games were huge many years ago, and they sort of went away again. And some of the film tie-ins and cash-ins have been a mixed bag over the years. But either way, I think this will be a great title. But for some reason, it didn't excite me as much as some of the others that were there, and it just so for me, I wasn't as keen on that. But either way, I think God of War and the Shadow of the Colossus are two titles and Days Gone that really sort of impressed me. So that was Sony. On to Ubisoft. Now, I didn't get to see the Ubisoft one because I was there somewhere doing something out and about. Where was I? Oh, I was at Microsoft trying to get you guys some footage on all these new games. Oh, goodness me, that's been a pain. We'll come back to that in a moment. But Ubisoft, Kevin, you saw the conference. What did you think of it? I mean, we can talk about the Crew too probably in a little while, but perhaps Paul might have a little bit more to share on Ubisoft.
Yeah, that was the only conference I actually watched live at, during E3. And I actually thought it was a really strong conference. I think the reveal of Mario plus Rabbids looks really exciting. Very different to what I was expecting. Beyond Good and Evil 2, I can't believe that actually got announced.
Yes,
officially, it's coming, and the CG. I know it was a CG trailer, but the art direction, the style of it, the ambition, it looks superb.
I just want to cut in there, Paul. The Mario. Now, I did see some of this conference actually, and Shigeru Miyamoto came in, and they've got Mario, and oh wow, it's Mario this, and then you see the game, and it's like that's not a Mario game. It's a bit. It's a bit sort of strategic in its own way. I know it's something different, but you're expecting a game world that's a bit more smooth and flowing. But they seem very happy about it, and I can't comment because I haven't played. But it certainly wasn't what I was expecting. But sorry, carry on, Paul.
Yeah, Skull and Bones. That took me by surprise. Taking an influence from Assassin's Creed Black Flag and making it into a multiplayer team versus team game. Really surprising. Far Cry 5 looks pretty wicked. And then, of course, you've got the Crew 2, which actually was surprising. I wasn't expecting, bolts and planes. Definitely not.
Yeah, well, just to go on, Skull and Bones, I think, had one of the most amazing trailers ever. And it's a bit like what I was saying recently about Ubisoft on the Crew original. The Crew original game had an amazing trailer. And the game wasn't visually on that level. The Skull and Bones thing, I think it'd be nice if there was a bit more adventure in that world rather than just, I think it's just going to be one-on-one fights through ships, but I look to see what more depth there is for the single player experience as well. But onto the crew. Yeah, I mean, the crew, already talked about it on the podcast, and we'd assessed what Beyond the Road, I think it was the slogan. And, hugely impressive. It's impressive in terms of the visuals, impressive in terms of how they move forward, how they're using the scale of the world, which is just unbelievable in terms of how large it is, and how they're utilizing every aspect of it. I think we saw from the Crew original, then we saw the Crew Wild Run, where it sort of became the game they always wanted it to be, and now.
Yeah, it's like a natural evolution, isn't it? With the Wild Run, they had this more sort of fun element to an otherwise pretty serious game with a serious sort of mission storyline. And I guess the Crew Wild Run sort of gave us a hint of what was to come, and calling all units as well. So it's a really fun sort of world. And like what Paul was saying, I just didn't expect this much of a sort of change in direction. So it's like they've really sort of opening up a sort of 360 degrees playground now, and it's no limits anymore, even less so than say Forza Horizon. So it's incredible that they've really opened up this space, and it's just giving players the choice, what you want to do, you can actually do. If you want to go for a bit of a flying exercise, you can do that. If you want to jump into a boat, you can do that. You have bikes, you've got monster trucks, there's buggies, I think there's rally cars, there's open wheel racers. You've got the motorsport focus completely. So it's interesting. They have like racetracks as well, and then I believe I saw some licensed race cars. So it's incredible what they're doing with this game, and it's going to appeal to a lot of people, because a lot of people are going to get different things out of it. And it's interesting how they're going to sew all this together into one sort of cohesive career mode, because as I understand it, there's one sort of main protagonist which is going to sort of participate in all these areas for a sort of multi-skilled motorsports champion, as they're calling it. So it's an interesting one. It's a big undertaking though, and they've turned it around in such a short time. I think they've only been working on it for about 3 years. So it's incredibly exciting, incredibly surprising, and perhaps our biggest surprise from E3, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think they're still working on the physics at the moment. I think the car handling physics need a little bit more depth. You want it to be approachable and fun, but you need a little bit to give the expert the ability to just get something more out of the car.
Yeah, I mean, they were billing it as easy to pick up and play, but hard to master. So I imagine there's going to be some sliders there that you're going to be able to change some settings and get out of it what you want to get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, whereas the boat physics at this stage, they're keeping the boat quite flat so you didn't get motion sickness rather than bobbling it around on the water. And the plane was altogether a lot more complex to fly, because it included crosswinds and everything else. So, like I say, I used my ace combat skills to adapt swiftly to the planes and enjoyed it immensely. So, yeah, one of my sort of top games of the show there. Really, it was definitely impressive seeing the crew. So, Ubisoft generally have a fun conference. Yeah. I do wish they didn't feel the need to swear during the conference. I know it's just a thing, and they like to
edgy thing they have, isn't it?
They do. They like to be a bit edgy, and I'm thinking. I was sitting there watching him saying, "Oh, he said the F word. Is he going to say the C word?" No, he isn't going to go that far. And I just think, if you're going to swear. But no, there is this kind of edginess that they do, and I just think, do you know what? It's a general conference for everybody. It's something I'm never as comfortable with. But that's Ubisoft's little edgy nature. They try to do things that are a bit off the wall, and I like that. I like that form of innovation. So I'd like them to keep doing that, and that's always great to see. And they had a bit more there for Steep. I think they're advertising as well. They were showing at the show, but Steep never did anything for me last year. But it'd be interesting again to see how that evolves. In terms of where it's going. So that was the main conferences. I didn't see Nintendo. Did anyone see Nintendo? What they had for the show? I don't think they had anything racing at all. But did they have anything big, Paul? Did you see it? I
didn't actually watch it live. I've caught some of the highlights, and I'm a huge fan of Mario, full stop, and Mario Odyssey in particular. They showed a lot of footage in that, and that is so different to what I was expecting it to be. The ability to throw your cap onto enemies and inanimate objects and actually take control of them. That's I totally wasn't expecting that, and I think that's going to be one of the games of the year when it comes out. Is it October or November? But in terms of surprises, I guess it was Metroid Prime 4. That has to be the big surprise. I don't think anyone was expecting it, and then it's not to be Retro Studios. I'm very keen to actually see what they're doing with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nintendo, they do keep bringing out the old characters, don't they? And you know, I think Mario Kart's been huge for them recently. They're always quality over quantity, and they're good at what they do. You know, talking of which, we had the Nintendo Classic SNES.
Yeah,
and that released yesterday. I say released; it was released for all of about 20 minutes before it sold out. You know, and it's a frustrating company, Nintendo, when it comes to things like that. You know, in a past life, I was a buyer buying for Nintendo products for a few years, and you'd always order thousands and receive a couple of hundred in return. It's very frustrating for the UK stockists, but it's clearly going to be a very, very popular unit when it's released. Did either of you manage to get your hands on one?
no, I believe there's much more SNES units than the NES though, so you probably got a better chance. But I've got my originals. You know, why do I need these when I've got the originals? I've got my original games still, and I do bust them out every now and again and have a go. You know, so.
Well, I do the same. The only thing I would like, I wish Nintendo would release Star Fox 2 as an original SNES cartridge in a box. I would buy it just for my SNES collection. But other than that, it's just emulation, isn't it? Which isn't like having the real thing.
No.
So there we have it. That's the SNES Classic. So on to the show itself then. E3 this year welcomed in members of the general public. If you've watched my floor walks of the South Hall and West Hall, you'll have seen me fighting my way through. The Nintendo section was impossible to film in and impossible to walk through.
Yeah, we had that fantastic viewpoint as you held up the camera and we saw the masses of people. Goodness knows how many deep they were, but it just looked like hell on earth.
Oh, it was horrible. It was the heat in there was unbelievable in that section because you're sort of cordoned into Nintendo this year. And I just said, you know, we can't cover this. We can't cover these games because we can't film. You know, as soon as you try filming, someone's bumping into you, someone's squeezing by. The whole general public thing didn't work. And, you know, people were paying over $200 a ticket to get in. So they weren't cheap. And then when they got in, a lot of people barely got to play anything because the queues were so long that, you know, you'd queue for an hour, 2 hours to play one game.
Was there any time where the media were let in before the public, or was it just straight away from start to finish? It was public access.
No, it was really overzealous security as well. It was on the one hand you had this really strict security, but on the other hand, you know, there was a lot of lax security in some areas as well. So they didn't know how to cope with the general public.
Yeah.
Well, the general public mixing with the press. You see, classically, you had doors that were for people who worked on the stands. So the exhibitors can go through that door and the media go through that door. Well, the problem now is that the exhibitors go through that door and the media go through the general public in that door. And so that meant that we all had to queue with the general public to get in. So, you know, it meant that if you had a meeting in the morning, well, forget it. You're not going to be allowed in the hall if they decide that they want to control the flow of people. So it was interesting. The energy that you get from E3, though, is always amazing. You know, the stands are so amazing. The investment in the stands is just out of this world. Nothing's changed there. It's been a long time since I've been to E3, but not a lot's changed. I mean, when I last went there many years ago, I remember EA actually built a Harry Potter castle in one of the halls one year, and actually built an entire, you know, Hogwarts in the castle. It was a castle in the hall. It was just amazing sort of the levels of investment that these companies go to. But this year, from a media perspective, if you didn't have behind closed doors or meetings, well, you wouldn't have got much out of actually being at E3. So in that sense, it was an interesting event. But we'll move on now to the racing games. Obviously, we're going to talk about those in separate podcasts. But the first one we'll talk about then is, what should we talk about first, Kevin?
Should we go to some WRC7?
WRC7. Okay, so WRC7 was, for me, a fantastic surprise. It's moved on a lot every year. The throttle response was excellent. The handling was excellent. And I really enjoyed it from the off. A lot of people have complained about the robotic co-driver. And he is robotic. And they could could have done with adding a new one. But having said that, I drove perfectly with his commands. They were spot on and on point every time. And I thought that worked perfectly. We had this a font thing, it's a French thing that's supposed to be in there, but a lot of people complained about, but I didn't even notice when I was driving. I was listening too much to what he was telling me. So, yeah, I would actually say a massive surprise at the show. Paul, have you seen any of our coverage of WRC7?
That's one game I haven't actually been able to catch up and see anything on, so no. I don't know what's different about it, what's new, what they've added. Can you tell me more?
Well, the problem is on all these racing games, we can't tell you much at the moment. All we know is that the three stages were being shown: Corsica, Mexico, and Monte Carlo. They've remodeled the cars, they've altered the tracks, tightened them, they've added a lot of textures, they've redone the audio. But in terms of other details, they were keeping a bit tight-lipped at the moment. They really just wanted to focus on gameplay at this event. I think we're going to see a lot more at Gamescom in terms of sort of new features. But either way, in terms of what they showed, I think I went to the stand not knowing what to expect. But having said that, WRC5, the development team worked so hard, but a year just wasn't enough time to make a game.
No.
And they knew that, and everyone knew that. Who knew anything about development knows they just didn't have the time. WRC6, they built upon it, but I think this year they've got a much bigger step forward. I just hope one of the problems last year was stuttering frame rate. And I hope they can really optimize the frame rate.
And that was actually present in WRC5, so it was like an ongoing problem. In my opinion, what I played of 6 though was slightly improved, but like you say, it still existed. So they really need to iron that out, because you'll get a reputation then for releasing products that are not quite up to par, which is a shame.
Yeah, I think something they need to look at. So WRC, one of my top few games of the show. I'll come back to that in terms of an order later in the show. What's the next one we should talk about, Kevin?
Should we go to some F1 2017?
F1 2017. Okay, so F1 2017 builds on the excellent F1 2016. Graphics are great. The sound, I think, is great because a lot of people have a perception of sound because they hear F1 cars on TV and think that's what an F1 car sounds like. It sounds nothing like that in real life. I mean, same with the bikes I was mentioning on MotoGP recently. When you go to a MotoGP, you can't hear one singular bike. You hear an echo of lots of bikes going past you while you're wearing your earplugs, I might add. So it is very loud. But of course, this year we have the addition of classic cars coming back. We have the addition of different circuit types in terms of the shorter circuits within the larger circuit. Various other little options as well. There's quite a lot of other tweaks and options, improvements to the physics. Overall, I think it's a really nice F1 package. But you'll always see this with MotoGP, WRC7, and F1, that there is always a sort of dissatisfaction amongst the fans. No matter how good those games are, they struggle to meet the ultimate satisfaction of some fans. But either way, I think all three titles have made good steps forward this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see the classic content back, isn't it? We saw it in 2013, and then disappeared for a number of years. But it's almost like a teaser, because we're not getting proper races. Well, in the career mode, at least, we're not getting proper races with the classic cars. We've got like these invitational events. You've got like a checkpoint, overtake, and pursuit modes. We've seen the checkpoint and the overtake modes actually on the channel. If you haven't checked those out yet, do have a look at those. You see those in action, and it's like a teaser, isn't it? You really want to sort of get into some racing in the career mode, but you can play outside of the career mode. You can have like races with the classic cars, which is good to see, and no doubt online as well we can have some of that stuff. But as I understand it, they've added these classic stuff. They're going to have a much larger R&D element in the game as well. So I guess it's we've seen it with Dirt 4. You have all this sort of managerial stuff added to the game, which I think is great to see. It adds more depth to racing games. Not many racing games actually take the plunge and have these elements in place. We saw it at WRC2, which it appealed to some players, but it wasn't for everyone, I guess. But as long as it's user friendly and integrated well, people will get a lot out of it. And it's nice to see F1, they're evolving the career, they're adding more and more to it just to make it more in-depth experience. So it's good to see.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, obviously it's Codemasters, but you've seen a bit of Formula One, obviously internally. You've seen how it's been going. I mean, classic cars. That's good, isn't it, to see them back?
Oh yeah, no, really good to see those back. They're a really different experience to play, and you mentioned the audio. I think the audio in this iteration of F1 is the best it's ever been, and those classic cars in particular just sounds really, really stunning. And I don't know if you know, I'm quite a big F1 fan, and I actually run an F1 league. When a lot of the guys at our studio up in Runcorn, we all participate, and we do the full 21 weeks worth of races, or however many races in that yearly calendar. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to 2017, and I've been fortunate, obviously behind the scenes, be able to play the E3 build, check it out, seen a lot of the work in progress, and yeah, I think it's going to be a really good version. And if you've got, think of PS4 Pro or an Xbox One X, you're going to get another level of visuals as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I didn't know you liked F1 that much. That's good to hear, actually. We should talk about the Grand Prix sometime. This week's action drama. Goodness, shall we even go there or just leave it? Anyway, yes, classic cars. I love classic cars, as many viewers will know. I love racing as Nigel Mansell, something like that, Damon Hill. Like you say, Kevin, it would be nice to have more cars in there. There are various different cars from history that I'd love to see, but unfortunately, and I spoke to various different people, not just Codemasters, about this. When it comes to classic content, there's all complications regarding licensing of who ran that car and who ran the sponsor on that car, and sometimes you have to contact not just the car company but all the separate sponsors that were on it, and some of those companies don't exist anymore, so you end up with
like a logistical nightmare, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's releasing it officially is a lot more of a challenge than just contacting a car company and whacking it in there, because it's of a historical value. So either way, I think they've assembled what they can. I think it looks really nice, and I think the handling's really nice as well. So F1, nice, solid development, step forward experience there. So Kevin, what do you think? What's next?
I guess the last one is Project Cars 2, which is probably our most anticipated game of the year.
Project Cars 2, absolutely. I mean, on paper, it is just the perfect driving game in so many levels. I mean, the amount of content it has on there, in terms of weather, in terms of seasons, in terms of an incredible roster of courses, and I know I've seen some stuff that's not been revealed yet, and there's some the scale of the game is just on another level. So there's something there for everyone in terms of motorsport. It's going to be a case of, can the development team bring all those sort of pieces together in the last few months? And I know that obviously development, you have a crunch period as you bring everything together, but my goodness me, it's going to be a big crunch as they bring that much together. I worked for Wild Testing as well years ago, and when you're getting new builds in of a game of that level of complexity, oh my goodness, you need a lot of testers, and it must do your head in, actually, constantly.
It's unprecedented, isn't it? A game on this scale, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk
September 22 as well. It was surprising because they initially went with a late 2017 release date. I did not expect it to come out in September. To me, that's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Bell said on the GT Planet forum a while ago, September-ish, and it's almost lighting a fire under the development team. But there's always, and Paul will know better than anyone, there's a developer would develop a game forever. There's financial limitations, there's investment limitations, and you've got to work with what you're given, and the artists and everyone will put the maximum in there, and then you've got to bring all those elements together. So, certainly handling, we're going to talk about this more in depth on a Project Cars 2 video, and we've got a developer interview coming as well. But, what we're seeing so far is looking really good. And they just need to fine tune that handling across all the cars and bring it all together in the coming months. But yeah, I mean, Paul, Project Cars 2, you've seen it. As a racing fan, you've got to be excited by it as well.
Oh, it's on my list to buy this year for sure. Yeah. It looks like it's got a great range of disciplines, tracks, modes. Yeah, it seems to have everything a racing fanatic would want. So yeah, and it looks like a good step up as well from the original Project Cars. I enjoyed that a lot, but it seems to have more of everything this time around.
Yeah, I think like many developers, they release a game and they say that was a great game, but it didn't do justice perhaps to the entire vision that they had, or they had a vision that was
I believe
even more expansive.
they wanted Rally, didn't they, in the original? And they couldn't quite manage it. So
yeah, there was definitely talk of that. They've got the ice racing in this one, but I think certainly in Project Cars 3, you're probably going to see some rally in there as well. Then it will get competitive. But no, at the moment, yeah, I think very impressive. So yeah, I think that's all the key racing titles of the show, isn't it? Of course, Gran Turismo as well, Kevin. You've forgotten about that one. Just still there. I did actually go along to the stand. They wouldn't let me on the stand, by the way. Security just said, no, you're not allowed to film Gran Turismo on the stand. Then it took me 2 days to try getting permission on the stand. They said no, and then I just managed to find another area where they had a Gran Turismo just to see it in VR and the gameplay. The game itself, I can't say off the top of my head. I couldn't see any major differences between that and the beta. The VR, I had our cameraman Tim with me, who does our F1 stuff, and I couldn't fit into the racing rigs they had. I was too tall. So I tried to squeeze in. It was no good. I just couldn't drive them, which is hugely frustrating. So I had to say to him, like, you're going to have to get onto the VR and try it. He actually said to me that the VR Gran Turismo was a lot of fun, very impressive, and hugely more engaging than the TV experience, because he said the TV experience is quite stable, sort of almost clinical. It lacks energy. But when you're actually in the car and it's shaking around you and it's all happening, it felt much, much better. So, he was left very impressed with the VR. We also saw the Thrustmaster wheel there as well. And note should be mentioned about the Thrustmaster range of wheels that are coming out: the Sparco wheel, the new Rally rim, the new Xbox wheel. I mean, amazing equipment from Thrustmaster. All of the new products coming out are another level compared to what we had, 10 years ago, when I had my plastic Xbox 360 wheel. So, yeah, it's making steps forward. Gran Turismo is one of those games that I was mentioning earlier that players are sometimes disappointed with annual releases. And we've been, I'd say to an extent, underwhelmed with some of what we've seen of Gran Turismo because of our own high expectations of what Gran Turismo should be, and also what a game should be when it has, and I mentioned this with some reservations, a sort of unlimited development budget. I know no game has a true unlimited development budget, but their budget must be on a level beyond.
Yeah, so you have to adjust your expectations accordingly, and we'll judge it based on how good the game is, of course. But you have an expectation when you see a big development team and publisher is involved. And to me, GT Sport, they didn't give us anything new really, did they? I think they showed off a new rally stage, but there was nothing mind blowing there. And you really thought that they need to come back strong with something. And do we really have to wait till Gamescom now to get something that's going to excite us?
Yeah, I'd like to see some new courses and new car types and types of racing. I'd like to see the one-player offering in terms of what the one-player experience will be as well, supporting that. I think we're at a point now where really they should be showing off that career mode.
Yeah.
But I think one thing to remember is, you've got Project Cars, people wondering what's going to do the best, of all these different racing games. I can tell you right now, this is Sony, and Sony and Microsoft both have huge marketing budgets, and marketing budgets do make a difference. Gran Turismo, when it comes out, you will know about it and everyone will be playing it. So Paul, what do you think of Gran Turismo so far? We've been seeing it over the past year. It has come a long way since the preview event last year, but what have you made of it?
From what we saw at E3, we didn't really get to see a great deal of new content. We saw some really nice trailers at E3, but I don't think we really got to find out many more details about the scope of the game and single player modes and all those other things. Yeah, I'm interested to see when they start to talk about the rest of the game, but I'm sure we're only going to hear a lot more about it.
Well, certainly. I think that one of our concerns has been the one-player experience. What the one-player experience is going to be. It's great for the competitive esport racing fan.
Yeah.
Esports, Paul. What do you think of esports right now? There's this wave of esport chat going on. You guys probably talk about it in the studio all the time. I'm sure you do. What do you make of this esports wave going on now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting scene. It's certainly something we're keeping a close eye on. We even considered it back in Driveclub. And we've been looking at games like what Forza have been doing, and we can definitely see that the scene is starting to grow and develop around. So yeah, you're starting to see more and more games have an esport element. I think was it MotoGP this year they've introduced a form of esports, and I'm certain we'll see more and more driving games support it. Whether they'll all be successful, highly unlikely, but I think the scene's only going to grow over time. I think competition and spectating of racing games, is a fun element, and I think will grow. But I think there'll only be so many kind of pillar titles which can really support a long life, behind their esports.
It's an interesting learning curve at the moment. I mean, Team VVV started life as an esport team 11 years ago. I mean, I was an esport player, and we used to compete all the time. But I found it quite stressful and quite draining. And I found running a team to be quite stressful and draining. And from an area of sort of, well, dare I say it, profitability, it didn't break even, put it that way. It was just costing. And finding sponsors as an esport team is nigh impossible at the moment. It really is very difficult. It's not as straightforward as everyone thinks. So it certainly needs some ground rules in terms of how it's going to work as a structure. And I think you will end up with lots of different types of esports with very different structures. And some of that's going to be bound around publishers themselves and their own systems. But either way, we're going to keep a close eye on it at PVV. We might be doing some esports stuff ourselves at some point, but you just never know. So watch this space on that. Yeah, that was Gran Turismo. Elsewhere at the show, I don't think there was much else there, really. There was Wreckfest shown behind closed doors, and they were showing the new build, which has just gone up. I think it's gone up today on the PC, which shows a radical new car customization feature. So we're going to take a look at that at some point. But apparently Wreckfest has moved forward. Wreckfest was known as Next Car Game about 4 years ago. It's been kind of in a development limbo for a few years from Bugbear. And it was brilliant when it first got shown. I loved it. And then they changed the handling and the look, and they changed some of the new tracks, and I kind of got bored with it. I wasn't as into it anymore, but they understand where they went wrong. Apparently they're bringing it back to where it was, and we'll see what happens there. So Wreckfest coming out on PC this year, aimed to come out on console next year. Of course, The Crew 2 will be next year, but later this year we've got F1, then followed by obviously Project Cars, Isle of Man TT, which was shown at E3 in a very early form. The handling was only 10 to 15% complete. So they said to me I could play it and record it if I wanted to, but I said, well, there's not really much point because the bike handling's not even been properly implemented. So, we'll wait until there's a more complete build apparently being shown at Gamescom. It's one of those things where you think, wow, this game's due out in just a few months' time. I mean, Paul, you must have seen games. I've seen a couple of games completely transform in the last sort of 4 or 5 months of development. I mean, you must see this a lot. Does it ever surprise you how much a game comes together in that last sort of crunch period?
Yeah, I've been in situations in the past, working on titles where you've got less than 12 months to go, and you're thinking, how on earth are we going to actually pull this together, get out on time? And it's one of those things where the team just pulled together, and things can just fall into place. And yeah, it was, in particular, I remember the original MotorStorm. That was probably one of the most stressful kind of development experiences I've ever had. And it only really came together in those kind of final 6 months. And that's everything from the visuals to the gameplay to the branding side of things. And yeah, it's phenomenal what can happen in those final few months. But I prefer not to have to develop in such a situation.
That was still sort of very much sort of growing days in terms of new levels of 3D graphics. Would you say that the sort of modular construction is more organized now in terms of development than it was then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's significantly easier. We understand the hardware, and for example, we're working on a new title, which I unfortunately can't talk about at all. But we're obviously building a new engine, but it's been significantly easier than in any previous project that we've worked upon. We're familiar with the hardware, the tools, even PS4 Pro, Xbox One X. It's straightforward, and you can really get things up and running significantly faster than you could do in any previous generation. So, yeah, it's a real pleasure to work with all the latest hardware and work on these latest consoles.
Yeah, no, well, it's interesting always to get the developer's perspective, because I've worked at various different places, seen very different cultures in terms of crunch time, and it really does get quite hair-pulling experiences for people, especially when you find a game critical bug, 2 weeks before launch. And that can be quite, no, it's not that entertaining, I tell you. So no, that's really, really interesting. So that's sort of the chat looking at E3. I think that covers it then. Questions, Kevin? Do we have any questions?
We do indeed. So Fernando asks, tell us some backstage stories about how it was working so close to Sony, and how did the closing down go?
Well, obviously the closing side of things is not something I'm going to be able to talk about, but working for Sony was a pleasure. I can't remember exactly how many years I worked with them. I think it was a decade, something along those lines. And all the first party teams were fantastic to work with, to collaborate with, and it was a fantastic experience. And I learned so much working for Sony. I think obviously things didn't go the way that everyone necessarily wanted, but we've still got a fantastic relationship, and I'm looking forward to working with Sony again in the future.
Yeah, cool. So Gamer Geek Hawk asks, does Paul think Driveclub 2 is possible if Sony went to Codemasters and agreed a deal with them to make it?
I think that's if Sony came to us and wanted us to make Driveclub 2, I mean, it's certainly something we could discuss. Whether Sony would actually come to us and ask us to do that, I think that's highly unlikely. I mean, they're in a position now where they've got Gran Sport coming out, and that's going to be the racing franchise for that platform. So I think it's highly unlikely anything would happen in that regard.
I've got a question you may or may not be able to answer, Paul, but in terms of development team, is there what percentage is now at Codemasters? Is it just a handful, or is it a good size of the Driveclub team that were moved across?
It was virtually everyone. I think at the time we were about 55 people, and yeah, I'm pretty sure we started the team at Codemasters with just over 50. So yeah, it's the same guys, who worked on the design, the art, the tech, the tools, etc.
Brilliant. It's nice that you've been able to keep that unit together, isn't it? Because you learned a lot together, and you can keep that knowledge sort of pool.
Yeah, I think that's one of our strengths now. I mean, some guys have been working, at the studio all together for 19 years. It's a hell of a long time. I'd say that on average, most of us have been together for nearly 10 years now. So it's a fantastically experienced team. We all know how each other work. We've been able to hire some fantastic people into the team, and then we've been able to leverage all the talent and expertise and knowledge from the rest of the Codemasters wider group. Whether that's the guys in Birmingham working on F1 and micro machines, or the guys in the South working on the Dirt franchise. It's fantastic to be able to speak to them, get their feedback, look at the tech, share the technology as well. It's been a really kind of fantastic experience, and I don't think it could have gone any smoother, kind of the transition over into Codemasters.
No, that's brilliant, isn't it? It's like a bit of a dream transition, really, given Driveclub. I mean, Driveclub, however you look at it, had a tough patch that first year. I mean, it didn't look. For me, I wasn't blown away by it when I first saw it, but then a year later, the game had transformed, and I was like, "This is more like it now. This is like a different game. It's changed completely in terms of its sort of visual look and feel." What was that? Was that just learning the hardware? Was that optimization? Why do you see those? A bit like the Crew in a way. Why do you see these steps forward in technology?
It is predominantly just learning the hardware more than anything else. Understanding the limits and making sure you make the right decisions up front, and that's one of the things we didn't do. We didn't make all the right decisions. So, we were very fortunate throughout the service to be able to, invest a lot more time into Driveclub at that point, and relook at certain things and improve upon them, and make the game that was, at the end, I think, a fantastic experience.
Yeah, Yeah, I found it a responsive team. You know, if I highlighted something or if somebody highlighted something, I found your team was very responsive to working on that and develop that. And I think that that really works. Do you think that in the bubble of development that sometimes you're working with everybody and you're thinking, oh, this is really good, and you really need to sort of extract yourself from that bubble to work out if something's working or not with a wider audience?
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in development and not see the bigger picture. Which is why, and kind of all of our future products are very keen to get, user testing in and also feedback from the wider Codemasters group now, because we've got that sort of flexibility of various teams got Codemasters who we can send those to on a regular basis and give them feedback. And it's something we've already started doing. Like I had hands-on early builds of Dirt 4, and we were able to give them feedback. We played Micro Machines and given them feedback, and now we're playing that collaboration where we can see the builds and give them objective, constructive feedback is, something that's only going to improve each of us games that we work on.
Yeah, no, that's good. And it's good that you guys take constructive feedback. I had one developer who I gave them constructive feedback and they stopped talking to me, sadly. But there you go. I'm not gonna hold back when I play the game. I actually met the developer recently, and they said that actually everything I said was correct, and they've now put it into their sequel. So I was like, there we go. So anyway, next question, Kevin.
Yeah. So Richard Ashton asks, do you think GT Sport will deliver in the long run?
I'm certain it will do. Yeah, I think the studio at Polyphony, they've got a very talented bunch of guys over there. And I think they'll have the opportunity with Sony in particular to continue to develop GT Sport over the long term. And I'm sure it will deliver, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it will come together. I think that they, I think you've seen how games evolved. Goodness, we saw how Driveclub evolved. I mean, these things do come together. And, I think if you look at Gran Turismo over the past year, it's now at a stage where we expected to see it last year, but now we need to see more. So let's see how it goes.
It seems to me one of those titles that's going to be, it's going to keep evolving for many years to come, and they're going to add new features and just tweak little bits here and there just to sort of fine tune what they have. But anyway, Nick asks, Project Cars 2 or GT Sport? You can only buy and play one. Which would you choose?
Based upon the information that we have right now, I feel like I've got a much better understanding of Project Cars 2 in terms of the range of cars, disciplines, modes, etc. So on that information, alone, I think I'll be picking up Project Cars 2.
And I'm the same. Project Cars 2 has excited me in ways in which Gran Turismo hasn't, and it's also got a lot more to it in terms of the weather evolution, the seasons, but just the track roster is on another level. So they don't even compare on paper. I mean, Project Cars 2 is leagues ahead.
Mm-hmm. So just some more sort of general questions here from Facebook. So we've got Charlie Woodside asks, did Alan get a hands-on with Forza 7 on a pad, and is it an improvement over Forza 6?
I got a hands-on with the pad, and it's much easier to play with the pad than it is with the wheel, sadly. I was doing pretty much perfect laps with the pad. So I played it on the wheel first. It had some kind of assists on. So every time I was turning into a corner, it was like the car was fighting me through every corner. It's very challenging to play just when you've got it. Because I turn up, like no practice. I jump on a demo, never played the game, never driven the car. Everyone expects perfection. And then I played it with the pad, knew the track now. Found it worked much easier with a pad, went back on the wheel again, turned off assist, set it to factory settings, whatever the car was, and it was much better. But I found I had a lot of fun with the wheel, but it was an awful lot of work to play. It wasn't as natural as I would like it to have been. So I found it easier with the pad, but it was nice having the big trucks racing around Mugello. And we did record some gameplay. Unfortunately, there was a complication at Microsoft when we were recording gameplay, and they supplied me with a 422 gig HDR 4K file, which I've not been able to do anything with. So I have all this awesome gameplay on Forza Motorsport of me racing all different cars and trucks, putting in probably better laps than you've seen anywhere else, and I can't show that footage yet, but we are looking at trying to find a way to convert that footage, and if we can do that, then you'll see it on the channel. But either way, No lie, I had a lot of fun playing Forza 5 with the controller, and it was great going back to Mugello as well. Looked great, and the trucks look and sound brilliant as well.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we've touched on most of these questions, but I guess the one last one is from Matt, and he asks, do you guys know when THQ Nordic is planning the release of Baja Edge of Control for Xbox One?
I know nothing on that title at the moment. It's one of those that's gone quiet. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see on that. So that's all the questions, is it, Kevin?
That's it.
Okay, so that's all the questions for tonight. I suppose last question to all of you really is: do you have any games that sort of non-racing that sort of stood out to you at E3, Kevin?
I guess for me, probably one of the most excited I got was for the PlayStation VR and Skyrim combination, which I wasn't expecting to see. So to sort of live in that world of Skyrim in VR for me is sort of mouth-watering prospect. So that's probably one of the things I'm looking forward to most, oddly. So yeah.
Yeah, and Paul?
I think we've touched upon a lot of the games that I'm excited about, but I guess one of the more, niche titles, which I was surprised to see arrive at PlayStation VR, Super Hot VR. I had my fingers crossed for a long time for that to come to PlayStation, so that's a massive fan of the original game on Xbox. So to see that come onto PlayStation VR, because I don't have a VR headset on PC, it's great because I really want to check that out.
Super Hot VR. Oh yes, I know it. Yes, the red characters there. Yes, I know. I've been looking at that. It's in the Steam sale at the moment. I'm kind of thinking, oh, should I get it for HTC Vive? Jump around my room. But my only concern is the length of the game, which may not be that long. But other than that, it does look very cool for me. Apart from Star Wars Battlefront, of course, there were two games that I've got footage of coming to the channel that I liked because I saw them and said, right, I like those. Ace Combat 7 was great. Really, really cool, Ace Combat 7. The VR is amazing, and we've got a developer interview as well because I liked it that much. I got a developer interview for it. They've recreated all these physics of clouds so that now when you're flying up off of your warships, and it's super detailed everywhere, when you fly into various clouds, it will affect turbulence and it will affect your plane icing up. And if you're tracking an enemy, they can fly away perhaps into a storm cloud and get away from you. And it's like Star Trek 2 when you're trying to find Khan. You can't find them until you come out of the cloud. So there was really cool elements to that. So Ace Combat 7, I think, looked great. Look forward to playing that, both on VR and normal. And another one which was unusual was called Strange Brigade. And it's a shoot 'em up that's kind of a cross between Uncharted and Gears of War. I absolutely loved it. The environments are as detailed as Uncharted, but with this sort of run and gun Gears of War gameplay, I was loving the detail, loving the world and the action. It was brilliant. It was running at 60 frames per second on the PC. Yay! Hopefully it'll run that on the Xbox One X, and I'll have a separate video coming up on the Team V Games channel, along with a little bit more chat about E3 stuff on a separate video as well. So that was my two games. I think that's it for now, chaps. I just want to thank you both for your time today. Paul, thanks very much for your time. It's good to hear that little insight. Do drop by again sometime, and we'll discuss more racing action.
No, it's been a pleasure, and I'd definitely like to join you guys again in the future.
Brilliant. And as ever, that's it from us. There's lots coming on the channel, viewers. We've got all of our feedback from the show. We've got a whole bunch of developer interviews to follow as well for Formula 1, for Project Cars 2, Ace Combat, WRC, Isle of Man. There's lots of E3 content still to come on the channel. So that's it from us for now. As ever, more soon.